ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله.
The political conditions in Arabia before the revelation of the Quran. One of the most remarkable features of the political life of Arabia before Islam was the total absence of any political organization in any form. With the exception of Yemen in the southwest, no part of the Arabian Peninsula had any government at any time, and the Arabs of that time never acknowledged any authority other than the authority of the chiefs of their tribes. The authority of the tribal chiefs, however, rested, in most cases, on their character and personality, and was moral rather than political. The only law of the land at that time was lawlessness. In the event a crime was committed, the injured party took law into its own hands and tried to administer justice to the offender. This system led very frequently to acts of horrendous cruelty, murder, torture, and years of wars and conflicts. If the Arabs ever exercised any principles of restraint, it was not because of any susceptibility they had to questions of right or wrong, but because of the fear of provoking reprisals and vendetta. Vendetta and revenge were two things that the Arabs at that time were well known for, and it consumed whole generations of the Arabs of that time. Since there were no such things as police, courts, or judges, the only protection a man could find from his enemies was in his own tribe. The tribe had an obligation to protect its members even if they had committed crimes. So, tribalism, or asabiyya, the clan spirit as they call it, or bigotry, took precedence over sound morals and ethics. A tribe that failed to protect its members from their enemies exposed itself to ridicule, humiliation, and contempt. Ethics, of course, did not enter the picture anywhere. Since Arabia did not have a formal form of government, many of the tribes were locked up in ceaseless warfare. War was a permanent institution of the Arabian society at that time, and training for war started at a very young age. The desert could support only a limited number of people, and the state of inter-tribal war maintained a rigid control over the growth of population. However, the Arabs themselves did not see war in this light. To them, war was a pastime, or rather a dangerous sport, or a species of tribal drama waged by professionals according to old and gallant codes, while the audience cheered them on. Eternal peace held no appeal for them, and war provided an escape from drudgery, boredom, and from the monotony of life in the desert. Many of them, the Arabs at that time, therefore, courted the excitement of the clash of arms. War gave them an opportunity to display their skills at archery, fencing, and horsemanship. During battles, they could distinguish themselves by their heroism, and at the same time win glory and honor for their tribes. In many cases, the Arabs fought for the sake of fighting, whether or not there was a cause. The nomadic tribes ranged over the Arabian Peninsula and plundered the caravans that would pass through their lands and raid the small settlements when traveling in search of water for their livestock. Many caravans and villages bought immunity from these raids by paying a fixed amount of money to the nomadic road bandits. It is important to grasp the fact that on the eve of the rebirth of Islam and revival of Islam, there was no government at any level at all in Arabia, and this fact may have been the main cause and may have affected the rise of Islam itself in the area. The total absence of government even if in its most rudimentary form, was a main factor in many of the tribes accepting the message of the Quran that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he was sent with and implemented in his character and daily lifestyle and behavior. The population of Arabia consisted of two main divisions: the sedentary Arabs and the nomadic Arabs. Hijaz, which is well known as Mecca and Medina, and southern Arabia were dotted with many small and a few large towns. The rest of the country had a floating population composed mostly of Bedouins. The more important tribes exercised a certain amount of authority in their respective areas. In Mecca, the dominant tribe was the Quraysh. In Yathrib, al-Medina, the dominant tribes were the Arab tribes of Aus and Khazraj, and the Jewish tribes of Nadir, Qaynuqa, and Qurayza. The Quraysh of Mecca considered themselves superior to the Bedouins, but the latter had only contempt for the city dwellers, who for them were only a nation of shopkeepers. The majority of Arabs were notorious for certain characteristics such as arrogance, conceit, boastfulness, vindictiveness, and excessive love of plunder. Their arrogance was partly responsible for their failure to establish a state of their own. They lacked political discipline, and until the rise of Islam, never acknowledged any authority as paramount in Arabia. However, they were also known for praiseworthy traits as well, such as generosity, generously hosting their visitors, bravery, eloquence, poetry, loyalty, and courage. Economically, the Jews had a very strong influence in Arabia at that time. They were the owners of the best arable lands in Hijaz, and they were considered the best farmers in the country. They were also the entrepreneurs of such industries as existed in Arabia in those days, and they enjoyed a monopoly of the armaments industry. Slavery was an economic institution of the Arabs. Male and female slaves were sold and bought like animals, and they formed the most depressed class of the Arabian society. The most powerful class of the Arabs was made up by the capitalists and moneylenders. The rates of interest which they charged, as well as the Jews, on loans were exorbitant, and were especially designed to make them richer and richer, and the borrowers poorer and poorer. The most important urban centers of Arabia were Mecca and al-Medina, both in Hijaz. The citizens of Mecca were mostly merchants, traders, and moneylenders. Their caravans traveled in the summer to Syria and in the winter to Yemen. They also traveled to Bahrain in the east and to Iraq in the northeast. The caravan trade was basic to the economy of Mecca, and its organization called for considerable skill, experience, and ability. The arrivals and departures of caravans were important events in the lives of the Meccans. Almost everyone in Mecca had some kind of investment in the fortunes of the thousands of camels, the hundreds of men, horses, and donkeys, which went out with hides, raisins, silver bars, and came back with oils, perfumes, and manufactured goods from Syria, Egypt, and Persia, and with spices and gold from the south. In Yathrib, in al-Medina, the Arabs made their living by farming, and the Jews made theirs as businessmen and industrialists. But the Jews were not exclusively businessmen and industrialists. Among them also there were many farmers, and they had brought much wasteland under cultivation. Economically, socially, and politically, Hijaz was the most important province in Arabia in the early 7th century Common Era. Before the prophethood of Allah's final messenger, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, with the revealing of the Quran, the most complex and advanced human aggregate of the Arabian Peninsula lived in the city of Quraysh, the city of Mecca. The era of the South Arab kingdoms of Petra and Palmyra had passed for some time in the history of Arabia. Now the future was being prepared there in Hijaz. The Arabs and the Jews both practiced usury, riba. Many among them were professional usurers. They lived on the interest they charged on their loans. Usury, riba, was widely practiced in Mecca, for in order to participate in the profitable caravan trade, many a Meccan who had only a modest income had to resort to usurers, moneylenders, who charged high interest. Despite the high interest, he could hope to benefit after the safe return of the caravan. The richer merchants were both traders and usurers. Moneylenders usually took a dinar for a dinar, a dirham for a dirham, in other words, 100% interest. This could mean that interests of 200 or even 400% were demanded. The nets of Meccan usury caught not only fellow citizens and tribesmen, but also members of the Hijazi Bedouin tribes active in the Meccan trade. As in ancient Athens, the principal means of oppressing the people's freedom were money and usury. So what were the social conditions in Arabia before the revelation of the Quran? As we all know, Arabia was a male-dominated society. Women had no status of any kind other than sexual objects. The number of women a man could marry was unlimited. When a man died, his son inherited all his wives except his own mother. A savage custom of some of the Arabs of that time was to bury their female infants alive. Even if an Arab did not wish to bury his daughter alive, he still had to uphold this honorable tradition, being unable to resist social pressures. They did this out of fear that their daughters would either become sex slaves when they grew up to another tribe, or that they may lose a battle to another tribe, or that they may resort to prostitution or be the wife of someone who didn't have any respect for her. Drunkenness and consuming intoxicants was also a common vice of the pre-Islamic Arabs. With drunkenness went their gambling. They were compulsive drinkers and compulsive gamblers. The relations of the sexes were extremely loose. Many women sold sex to make their living, since there was little else that they could do. These women flew flags on their houses and were called the ladies of the flags, or Dhat al-Rayat, better known as prostitutes. Imam al-Bukhari, he mentions on the institution of marriage in Arabia before Islam as follows. He says, Urwa ibn Zubayr informed him that Aisha radiyallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet, informed him that marriage in the pre-Islamic times was of 4 types. One type was the marriage of people as it is today, where a man grants his guardianship or daughter's hand in marriage to another man, and the latter assigns a dowry to her, and then marries her. Another type was where a man said to his wife, when she was purified from her menses, send this person and ask to have intercourse with him. Her husband then stays away from her and does not touch her at all until it is clear that she is pregnant from that other man with whom she sought intercourse. When it is clear that she is pregnant, her husband has intercourse with her if he wants. He acts thus simply from the desire of a noble child. This type of marriage was known as nikah al-istibda, the marriage of seeking intercourse. Another type of marriage that was common at that time was when a group of less than 10 men used to visit the same woman, and all of them had to have intercourse with her. If she became pregnant and bore a child, when some nights had passed after the birth, she sent for them, and not a man of them may refuse. When they had come together in her presence, she would say to them, You know the result of your acts. I have borne a child, and he is yours. He is your child, so-and-so, naming whoever she wanted by his name. And then her child is attached to him, and the man may not refuse. Another type of marriage that was prevalent and common at that time is when many men frequent a woman and she does not keep herself from any who comes to her. These women were called the baghiyah, okay, the prostitutes. They used to set up flags at their door and make signs that whoever wanted them went into them. If one of them conceived and bore a child, they gathered together to her and summoned the physiognomists. Then they attached her child to the man whom they thought the father was, and the child remained attached to him and was called his son, no objection to this course being possible. And when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came preaching the truth, he destroyed all these types of marriage, all these jahiliyyah types of marriage, except that which the people practice today.